HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Junk Food Politics: How Beverage and Fast Food Industries Are Reshaping Emerging Economies, by Eduardo J. Gómez. Read by Timothy Andrés Pabon. Preface. I love London coffee shops. They welcome diverse groups of people, are always lively, and often are the best place to mingle, read, and generate big ideas. My idea for this book emerged in such a place. Sipping a dark cafezinho one afternoon in West London, I chanced upon an online news article discussing the power of food-based interest groups for influencing university research in ways that made U.S. healthcare officials overlook the harmful health effects of sugar. I could not believe how influential these interest groups were. At the same time, I began to realize that many of the most innovative programs for preventing obesity and type 2 diabetes around the world were not working as well as expected. After several years of policy innovations in countries such as Brazil and Mexico, cases of obesity and type 2 diabetes were burgeoning, and even more worrisome, it was happening at an alarming rate among vulnerable populations such as children and the poor. Why? Could it be that a major external force, such as the political and social prowess of major food industries, was hampering the design and implementation of these policies? A flame was lit, a big idea emerged, and I endeavored to find answers to this vexing question. I soon realized that providing an answer to this question required an in-depth, comparative historical analysis of how major food and beverage industries came to wield great influence, how these industries were shaping politics, policy, and society, and how or even if governments should work with these industries in response. I wondered, in emerging middle-income countries seeing a rapid increase in foreign direct investment and economic growth, whether recent transitions to democracy and electoral institutions could safeguard vulnerable populations from the industry's policy influence and their unhealthy products. Were politicians genuinely committed to protecting children and the poor from consuming these products too much and preventing their associated ailments? Were presidential, congressional, and bureaucratic institutions adapting by learning how to grapple with this new public health challenge? In my mind, writing a book was the only fitting way to address these concerns adequately. Books require a lot of work, commitment, and support. Writing one is a marathon. I had the honor and privilege along the way of working with amazing colleagues. I would like first to thank my editor at Johns Hopkins University Press, Robin Coleman, as well as the editorial board at Hopkins, for providing me with the opportunity to have this book published. Robin offered in-depth comments, support, and encouragement along the way. Robert Brown, a production editor at Hopkins, did a brilliant job of working with me on polishing the end product. I would also like to thank other colleagues and research assistants for their thoughts and suggestions at different stages of research and writing. Ali Wallach, Nino Zotsenzide, James McGuire, Joseph Harris, and Tara Kesseram. Finally, my family and friends were there for me throughout the process. My father, Guillermo L. Gómez, never failed to offer a listening ear and encouragement. When I wasn't writing, my dear friends Patrick Crotty, Ash Hoke, Fatima Wakil, and Robert Hargrove, along with my family away from home at the Roger Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in West London, were always available for respite and support. It was a long haul, but my peeps helped push me across the finish line. Introduction. In 2016, Dr. Margaret Chan, who was China's first woman to serve as Director General of the World Health Organization, WHO, delivered a keynote address to the National Academy of Medicine. She was a leader, she was a visionary, and she had an important message. Speaking to a captivated audience, Director Chan discussed the need to tackle the burgeoning epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. Toward the end of her presentation, she argued that one of the primary reasons for the emergence of these epidemics was the lack of political will to tackle the interests and power of big industry. Specifically, she commented, when crafting preventive strategies, government officials must recognize that the widespread occurrence of obesity and diabetes throughout a population is not a failure of individual willpower to resist fats and sweets or exercise more. It is a failure of political will to take on the powerful food and soda industries. If governments understand this duty, the fight against obesity and diabetes can be won. The interests of the public must be prioritized over those of corporations. In essence, this book seeks to address why many of our most thriving emerging economies today have neglected to fulfill Dr. Chan's call to duty of taking on the interests and power of major junk food industries, defined here as multinational and domestic soda and ultra-processed food companies. Achieving this requires policies that not only effectively inform consumers, such as by ensuring the provision of accurate and reliable food labels, but also to effectively regulate the marketing and sale of their products, especially toward vulnerable populations such as children and the poor. Unfortunately, for most countries in the developing world, governments have neglected to earnestly pursue these marketing and sales regulatory policies, instead allowing junk food industries to thrive and prosper, but at the expense of the deteriorating health of these vulnerable populations. An intriguing puzzle emerges. Despite the absence of these much-needed regulatory policies, several of the world's biggest emerging economies, such as Mexico, Brazil, India, China, Indonesia, and South Africa, have done a commendable job of implementing a host of innovative obesity and type 2 diabetes prevention programs. Indeed, in these emerging economies, which are the focus of this book, governments have unleashed a myriad of innovative public awareness campaigns and funding for nutritional and exercise programs, and in some instances, have even introduced controversial soda taxes. Mexico was a global leader in this last regard, being the first in the world to adopt national soda taxes in 2013. What's more, in 2010, Brazil was recognized by the international community, along with the United Kingdom, for its policy innovations in tackling obesity. Nevertheless, these governments have repeatedly neglected to take on the power of big industry by failing to enact effective regulatory policies circumscribing industry's ability to communicate, market, and sell their products, especially to vulnerable populations. These policy outcomes have emerged at a time when the majority of childhood obesity cases are soaring in these high-growth emerging markets throughout the Americas, Asia, and Africa, and where type 2 diabetes is now prevalent among adults and adolescents. In fact, according to the WHO, the vast majority of overweight or obese children live in developing countries, where the rate of increase has been more than 30% higher than that of developed countries. Addressing this puzzling situation requires an in-depth comparative historical analysis of the complex world of junk food politics. In this book, I argue that there is a context of fear and opportunity. That is, junk food industries continuously fear the prospect of losing revenue in the industrialized West, and opportunities abound for investment in the emerging economies. With a rising middle income class and increased consumer spending, more than ever, industries have had incentives to engage in several political, institutional, and civil societal tactics, facilitating their ability to stymie the creation and implementation of regulatory policies. From engaging in innovative policy partnerships with government, to reshaping bureaucratic institutions and civil societal actors in their favor, these industries have garnered the political legitimacy and influence needed to achieve this policy objective. But industries are only partly to blame. Governments are equally responsible. Basically, junk food politics is a two-way street. While industries have worked hard to influence government, political leaders have had a historic track record of partnering with industry to achieve their alternative policy and thus political agendas. Powerful presidents in Mexico, Brazil, India, China, Indonesia, and South Africa have viewed these industries as necessary allies, helping these heads of state implement a host of economic and social welfare programs, and in the process, contributing to their nation's developmental prospects. But more importantly for these leaders, they have benefited politically, as partnering with industry has helped them to fulfill their economic and social welfare objectives, and thus achieve electoral promises. In this context, industry's political tactics have been indirectly supported by presidential partnership and political ambition. To better understand and explain the complex world of junk food politics, this book introduces an analytical framework titled The Industry Politics and Complementary Institutions, IPCI. To my knowledge, this framework is the first to unify several theoretical schools of thought in political science and public health policy to guide our analysis, and more importantly, provide a more thorough explanation of the junk food industry's political and policy influence in several emerging economies. As I explain in Chapter 1, this framework begins by focusing on the broader historical context of fear and opportunity, where more than ever, industry fears of dwindling global profits, when combined with new investment opportunities in the emerging economies, have generated incentives for junk food industries to influence politics, society, and policy. In this historical context, the IPCI emphasizes that industries have engaged in several political processes, ranging from the formation of health policy partnerships with government officials, to industry lobbying, the provision of largesse, and the strategic infiltration of bureaucratic institutions. At the same time, the IPCI underscores industry's efforts to restructure society in its favor, that is, by establishing civil societal partnerships and providing social services while strategically using these partnerships to generate divisions in society and ultimately to undermine collective opposition against industry. And finally, this framework introduces the important concept of complementary institutions. In other words, the historical and contemporary incentives that presidents have to partner with and use industry for political objectives. These partnerships ultimately serve to indirectly supplement the political tactics and influence of junk food industries, while emphasizing the fact that governments and their political leaders are also to blame for industry's ongoing political influence over noncommunicable diseases, NCDs. When taken together, the IPCI provides greater insight into why junk food industries continue to have the political legitimacy and influence needed to repeatedly undermine the introduction and effectiveness of NCD regulatory policies. Nevertheless, this approach also helps to explain why several of our biggest emerging economies have neglected to achieve Director Chan's call to duty on taking on the power and interests of big business. Sometimes it seems that political leaders benefit more from seeing these industries thrive and prosper, sadly, to the detriment of the health of our children and the poor. Understanding junk food politics. Applying my analytical framework to the cases of Mexico, Brazil, India, Indonesia, China, and South Africa helps to provide a thorough explanation of the junk food industry's political interference in NCD regulatory policy. In Mexico, the presence and influence of these industries emerged shortly after the introduction of free market reforms, for instance, free trade and deregulation. This context allowed industries such as Coca-Cola to obtain an early foothold in the market, becoming important economic and political entities. As the public health challenges of obesity and type 2 diabetes emerged, however, the government was slow to respond. After several years of scientific warnings from Mexico's National Institute of Public Health, the government implemented national prevention programs focusing on NCD awareness and improved nutrition. While regulatory policies targeting the marketing and sale of junk food products were eventually introduced, they were poorly enforced and mostly ignored. For the most part, These outcomes were the product of the junk food industry's apparent legitimacy and policy influence, facilitated through several political and social tactics. These tactics included working closely with Department of Health officials to create health and educational programs in schools, lobbying, and engaging in largesse, mainly via electoral campaign contributions, while infiltrating national bureaucratic advisory committees in order to safeguard industry's ideas and policy interests. These industries also engaged in several partnerships with academic researchers and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, but to the detriment of civil society's ability to mobilize and hold industries accountable for their actions. Despite these challenges, activists continue to draw attention to the need to address Mexico's childhood obesity and diabetes problem. Though initially struggling to gain government recognition and influence, in recent years, activists and NGOs have highlighted the junk food industry's harmful effects and drawn greater attention to the need for more aggressive regulatory action. Nevertheless, industry's political tactics and influence were also indirectly supported by Mexico's powerful presidents, such as Vicente Fox, PAN, 2000 to 2006, Felipe Calderón, PAN, 2006 to 2012, and Enrique Peña Nieto, PRI, 2012 to 2018. These leaders partnered with soda and ultra-processed food companies in order to achieve their alternative economic and social welfare agendas, such as implementing popular anti-hunger campaigns. This kind of strong presidential support, what the IPCI refers to as an example of complementary institutions, further emboldened industry's political legitimacy and, unfortunately, its ongoing policy influence. Mexico's neighbor to the south, Brazil, faced similar challenges. There, major junk food industries emerged following the transition to democracy and free market reforms, a process facilitating and encouraging investment in the soda, snack food, and fast food sectors. Despite an increase in obesity and type 2 diabetes cases among Brazil's most vulnerable populations, the government was slow to respond. And when it did eventually respond, the Ministry of Health's MOH focus was first on providing innovative prevention programs with an emphasis on information and awareness. While regulations restricting the marketing and sale of products were eventually introduced, they were either limited, ignored, or blocked by industry interests. And to this day, the government has not implemented or even attempted to introduce a tax on sodas and junk foods. Similar to what we saw in Mexico, these outcomes were the product of several industries' efforts to engage in health policy partnerships with the MOH, lobbying and largesse via campaign donations, while strategically infiltrating national regulatory agencies such as Anvisa, Brazil's national regulatory agency for food, pharmaceutical, tobacco, and other health care services. Nevertheless, major industries such as PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, and Nestle also provided several corporate social responsibility activities, ranging from the provision of community employment programs to supporting gay rights campaigns. Helpful in building social allies, these industry efforts nevertheless contributed to divisions in society between those that supported industry and those that did not, in turn hampering nutrition activists' ability to mobilize in opposition. Despite these challenges, the activist community continues to strive to address industry's harmful effects in society, and especially among children and the poor. And yet, the onus of responsibility cannot solely be placed on junk food industries. The government has also been responsible for industry's ongoing policy influence. Indeed, Brazil's presidents, such as Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, PT, 2002 to 2010, appear to have benefited from establishing a strong partnership with industry leaders, strategically using them to achieve popular anti-poverty measures. Lula even went so far as to create federal institutions that would sustain this partnership with industry. Strong presidential backing or what I refer to as complementary institutions, indirectly contributed to these industries' political legitimacy and policy influence. India, Brazil's counterpart in South Asia, is also experiencing similar challenges. Although junk food industries initially struggled to enter India's market due to the presence of a nationalist socialist government, free market reforms beginning in the 1990s generated new incentives and opportunities for several industries, mainly foreign, to capture and develop the market. India's government faced the dual burden of malnutrition, however, where ongoing undernutrition was soon accompanied by a high level of obesity and type 2 diabetes cases, surging in recent years among children and the poor. In this complex nutritional context, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, MHFW, was considerably delayed in providing several NCD prevention programs. While Parliament eventually succeeded in adopting a sin tax on sodas and junk foods in 2017, ineffective regulations emerged in the area of food labeling. The marketing of these products has instead relied on ineffective industry self-regulation, sans government involvement, while to this day, not a single piece of legislation exists regulating junk food sales, especially toward children. Industry politics has once again interfered, contributing to these policy outcomes. These outcomes were influenced by industry's efforts to partner with government on several innovative NCD prevention programs, aggressive lobbying, as well as industry's infiltration of federal regulatory agencies. At the same time, several companies, such as PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, and Nestle, have invested in local communities by providing health and other social welfare services. While broadening their support base, these efforts have nevertheless divided society and its ability to mobilize against industry's political activities and policy influence. While new and emerging, nutritionist activists in India are nevertheless making excellent progress in drawing attention to these industry tactics, raising greater awareness about the need to improve children and the poor's nutrition and overall health, while pressuring the government to adopt more aggressive regulatory policies. However, once again, industry politics is only partly to blame. In India, the government has also done its part in contributing to industry's ongoing policy influence. Indeed, as seen in Mexico and Brazil, India's political leaders such as Prime Minister Narendra Modi, 2014 to present, of the Bharatiya Janata Party, have relied on junk food industries as vital partners in achieving Modi's objective of increasing foreign direct investment, economic growth, and prosperity for all. By working with industry to achieve these alternative economic objectives, though, Modi has indirectly bolstered the political legitimacy and influence of these industries, while helping him maintain popular support. Here once again, complementary institutions have only served to benefit industry, ultimately at the expense of improving the health of children and the poor. Indonesia, India's neighbor to the south, also saw the gradual emergence of a thriving junk food industry, kindled by the expeditious transition to free market reforms and decentralization. Similar to India, the double burden of malnutrition contributed to delays in the MOH's policy response. While MOH prevention programs eventually emerged, efforts to introduce a soda tax were nevertheless short-lived. Few, if any, regulatory efforts were made in the areas of food labeling, marketing, and sales, and this has occurred amid the burgeoning growth of obesity and type 2 diabetes cases among the island's most vulnerable populations. But why did this occur? Industries and their supportive interest groups were successful mainly due to their aggressive lobbying efforts, while incessantly pressuring legislators to refrain from adopting a soda tax. Although close policy partnerships were never pursued with government, several junk food industries engaged in a wide range of corporate social responsibility initiatives in order to establish social legitimacy and influence. Nevertheless, these activities contributed to growing divisions in society, where industry partnerships with nutrition scientists and NGOs reduced the number of allies that activists could work with to mobilize and confront industry's ongoing policy influence. In this challenging context, and despite the fact that civil society's presence in the area of nutrition has only recently emerged, activists are doing a commendable job of raising awareness about obesity and type 2 diabetes and the double burden of malnutrition, while calling for more aggressive industry regulations. At the same time, however, Indonesia's presidents have also indirectly contributed to the junk food industry's success. Recent presidents, such as Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, commonly referred to by his initials SBY, 2004 to 2014, and Jokowi Widodo, 2014 to present, have established close partnerships with several major industries in order to help accelerate economic development, provide food security, and reduce poverty. But unfortunately, these complementary institutions once again appear to have indirectly contributed to industry's ongoing political and NCD policy influence. By far Asia's largest economy, China has also seen the consequences of complex junk food politics. After several years of political isolation from the West and a closed-off economy, major multinational industries emerged to capture the market, instigate development, and establish a strong foothold in the economy. Amid an escalating increase in childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes cases, the MOH was slow to respond, and when it did, it emphasized a host of NCD prevention and awareness campaigns. In addition to highlighting sound nutrition, most of these prevention programs were focused on the importance of daily physical exercise, especially for children. Despite these impressive campaigns, a soda tax was never introduced. Worse still, no effort has been made to create effective food labels. While no legislation exists regulating the marketing and sale of these foods to children, this in turn has incentivized industries to aggressively market their products to children and the poor. But why has this occurred? Once again, industries have been highly adept at influencing prevention and regulatory policy in their favor. As we saw in other countries, one key strategy has been these industries' policy partnerships with government, such as helping improve nutrition and exercise in schools. At the same time, industries have engaged in several lobbying tactics, though mainly through informal meetings with policymakers. Perhaps industry's most effective strategy has been its strategic infiltration of the China Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and industry's ability to inculcate its policy ideas by establishing strong linkages with policymakers within the China CDC. This tactic has allowed major companies like Coca-Cola to work through supportive NGOs, such as the International Life Sciences Institute, to establish the importance of physical exercise for preventing childhood obesity within the China CDC. What's more, industries have engaged in a wide variety of corporate social responsibility (CSR) activities, in turn aiding industries in their ability to increase their community support and social legitimacy. The dearth of NGOs that are working on advocating for improved nutrition among China's most vulnerable communities means that these CSR activities have not contributed to divisions within society. And unfortunately, while civic awareness and interests in improving China's obesity and type 2 diabetes situation has increased for a variety of political reasons, ranging from government suspicion of activist activities, especially those linked to foreign NGOs, and a reluctance to incorporate civil society's views, NGOs still have not had the space and opportunity needed to successfully hold industries accountable while pressuring government for NCD regulatory policies. Once again, further complicating matters is the central government's efforts to partner with industry to help achieve the government's goal of advancing economic development and eradicating poverty. In fact, central and provincial governments have worked closely with major companies such as PepsiCo and Coca-Cola on eradicating poverty, especially in rural areas, a historic central government priority. All the while, political leaders since the days of Deng Xiaoping, 1978 to 1992.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?